The galaxy was in chaos as the alien empire crumbled under the relentless attack of a single human soldier. The throne room of Queen Seraphia was a grand hall, once filled with towering statues and lavish gold, now turned to a scene of ruin. Explosions echoed outside, the shaking walls signaling the death of countless soldiers. The air was thick with smoke and dust as debris settled around the Queen's shattered throne. Queen Seraphia, a powerful and regal figure, crawled through the debris, her strength and pride unbroken. Her armor was scorched and her body bruised, but her eyes burned with fury. She was the queen of a vast empire, and today she would either be its salvation or its end. Her mind raced with thoughts of her people. What would happen now? She had ruled for decades, maintaining peace across multiple planets. But now she faced the most personal of betrayals. A human soldier had destroyed everything she had ever known. She was no longer a queen in a grand palace, but a woman, bloodied and broken, on the cold floor of her own throne room. The soldier who fired the grenade into her sanctuary was now a name etched in her mind. Captain Nathaniel Drake. She had heard of his kind before, ruthless, calculated, and merciless. In battle, he was humanity's weapon, sent to take down civilizations that dared to challenge Earth's dominance. Yet here he was, on her doorstep, attacking her kingdom with cold precision. He was everything she had been trained to hate. But as Seraphia crawled across the throne room, her hand touching the jagged edges of her broken seat, something shifted. A strange feeling swept over her curiosity. What kind of man was this human soldier? Was there more to him than just violence and destruction? She had never felt the sting of defeat like this before, nor had she ever thought a human could bring her empire to its knees. Yet here she was. As she neared the wreckage of her shattered throne, a voice echoed from behind the debris. "Your Majesty, are you alive?" The voice was rough, yet filled with a strange softness. She turned, her hand reaching for her blade, only to see a figure stepping through the smoke. Captain Nathaniel Drake stood before her, his face stoic but not cruel. He didn't come with weapons drawn. He came to check on her. For a moment, there was only silence. She was too weak to stand, too proud to beg. But the human did not advance. He simply watched her, his posture tense. Why didn't he just end it? Why hadn't he finished the job? The question burned in her mind, and for the first time, the queen found herself at a loss for answers. Her body trembled, but not from fear. She felt something else. Her mind told her to strike, to finish him off, but her heart hesitated. Why? Was this soldier different from the others? Why did he pause, letting her survive when she had no right to? His eyes, filled with something unreadable, locked onto hers. "You've lost," she said, her voice hoarse but defiant. She struggled to raise herself from the debris, trying to summon the strength she had once commanded, but her body refused to obey. "Why not finish what you started?" Her words felt weak, but they were still a challenge. He didn't respond at first. Then, without drawing a weapon, he walked closer, knelt down beside her, and carefully offered his hand. "I won't kill you," he said quietly. "Not today." His voice held no malice, no satisfaction, only a strange sense of mercy. Seraphia looked at his hand, then back into his eyes. The warrior she had fought against, the one who had brought her to the brink of ruin, was showing her mercy. Was this a trick? Was this part of his plan to break her? Or had something deeper shifted within him? She couldn't decide, but for the first time, she began to wonder, would she ever find out? The silence between them stretched, thick and suffocating. Queen Seraphia's mind raced as she tried to understand what was happening. A human soldier, the very symbol of destruction and power, was offering her mercy. What game was he playing? What did he want from her? She had never been in a situation like this, never faced an enemy who didn't want to finish her off when the opportunity presented itself. Her eyes scanned his face, looking for some clue, but his expression remained unreadable. He had destroyed her palace, killed her guards, and left her empire in ruins. And yet, here he was, offering her a lifeline, something she hadn't expected. Was it respect? Was it pity? She couldn't fathom it, but she felt something in his gaze, something that unsettled her. "You should kill me," she said, her voice barely a whisper as she looked at the hand he extended toward her. "Your mission is complete. My people are dead, and I'm nothing but rubble now. You won." Her words carried the weight of defeat, but she refused to show weakness. She was a queen, even if the throne she had ruled from was now reduced to a pile of broken stone. Captain Nathaniel Drake remained kneeling before her, his hand still held out. "I don't need to kill you," he said simply, his tone calm but firm. "I'm not here to conquer. I'm not here to destroy everything. I've been sent to do my job, but that doesn't mean I need to make you suffer more than I've already caused." He hesitated, as though searching for the right words. "I came for the Empire, not for you." Seraphia's brows furrowed in confusion. "So what now? What do you want from me?" She couldn't understand why he was speaking to her as if she mattered. To him, she was just another ruler in his path, a threat to be neutralized. That's how it had always been before. But now things were different. "I want nothing from you," Nathaniel replied, the sincerity in his voice making her pause. "You've already lost. But I'm not going to kill you just because I can." He stood up slowly, as if to leave, but then turned his gaze back to her. "The war's over for you. What happens next is up to you. No one can dictate that to you, not even me." He took a step back, still watching her. "But I'll be watching, just like everyone else will. What you do now will define you. It'll define what happens to your people, what happens to your empire, if it survives." Seraphia stared at him in disbelief. This human, this soldier, was offering her a choice. It was a choice that no one had ever given her before. She was accustomed to being in control, to having the power to decide the fate of millions. But now, in the face of her own downfall, she was powerless. The one thing she had always relied on, the fear of her power, had evaporated in an instant. "You think I have a choice?" she asked, her voice growing stronger despite the pain that still gnawed at her body. "You've destroyed everything. I'm a queen with no kingdom, a ruler with no empire. You think I can just walk away from this and make a new future for myself? You think I can start over?" Her voice trembled with a mix of anger and disbelief. "I don't know how to start over. I don't even know who I am anymore." The human soldier looked at her, and for a moment, Seraphia saw something in his eyes that she hadn't expected. There was no pity there, no judgment, no mockery. Just an understanding that unsettled her even more than the violence he had brought upon her. He was not like the others, not like the generals and conquerors she had dealt with in the past. He was different, and she didn't know what to make of it. "You're not alone," Nathaniel said softly, his voice carrying a weight that seemed too heavy for a man like him. "You've lost a lot, but there's still something you can do. Something that matters. It's not over. And you're not the only one who's been through hell." He turned his back on her, but his voice lingered. "You don't have to fight the war anymore. The world has already lost enough." The words hit her like a slap to the face. Was he asking her to surrender? Was he telling her to give up everything she had fought for? No, that wasn't it. There was something else in his words, something she couldn't quite grasp. Maybe it wasn't just about surviving. Maybe it was about what came after the survival, what you did with the scraps you had left when everything you knew had burned away. As Seraphia sat there, staring at the human soldier's retreating figure, something shifted in her chest. It wasn't acceptance. It wasn't even hope. But it was a sense of possibility. Perhaps, in the ruins of her empire, there was a chance for something new. A chance to rebuild, not as a queen, but as something else entirely. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in a long while, it felt like there might be something worth fighting for. She wasn't sure what that future would look like yet. She wasn't even sure she was ready to face it. But Nathaniel, Drake had given her something no one else had, something worth fighting for, a chance. The days that followed the destruction of her throne room were filled with uncertainty and quiet reflection. Queen Seraphia had always been in control, but now, as she wandered through the ruins of what had once been her empire, she felt a deep emptiness inside her. Her palace was gone, her people scattered, and her soldiers either dead or surrendered. The grand vision of her reign had crumbled, leaving her with nothing but the remnants of a shattered kingdom. Yet, the words of Captain Nathaniel Drake echoed in her mind. "You're not alone." Was it true? Was there really something left for her? Could she truly rebuild from the ashes of her former life? It seemed impossible, and yet there was something in his voice, a promise of something beyond defeat, beyond loss. He had shown her mercy, something she had never expected from an enemy. Now she found herself questioning everything she had once known about power and survival. Days turned into weeks, and Seraphia found herself wandering through the war-torn streets of her city. The once bustling markets were now silent. The towering structures of her palace had been reduced to rubble, and the people who once called this place home were either gone or hiding in fear. She had once ruled over all of it, but now she was just one of the last survivors of her fallen empire. She walked through the silent streets, each step a reminder of what she had lost. She could almost hear the laughter of her people, the shouts of her soldiers preparing for battle, the sound of her own voice commanding them all. But now there was only emptiness. The weight of her crown was gone, but it had been replaced by something else, an overwhelming sense of responsibility. The war had taken so much from her, but it had also given her a chance to see the truth. For the first time in her life, she saw the world not as a queen, but as someone who had lost everything. As she walked, she noticed the people around her. Some hid in the shadows, too scared to show their faces, while others stood in silence, waiting for the inevitable. Seraphia was no longer the ruler of their fate. She had no army, no power to command, yet she couldn't just walk away. She had to do something. The question was what? It was then that she saw a group of survivors, women and children, huddled together in a makeshift shelter. They looked up as she approached, and for a brief moment, she saw fear in their eyes. They didn't know her anymore. She wasn't their queen. She was just another person in this world, trying to survive. But as she stepped closer, one of the women spoke. "Are you here to help us?" The voice was soft, uncertain. "You're the queen, aren't you? You can help us, can't you?" Seraphia hesitated. She had never been one to help the weak, to take care of the vulnerable. She had always been focused on power, on expanding her empire. But now, standing in front of these women and children, she realized something. They didn't care about her empire, her title, or her crown. They cared about survival. They needed help, and they didn't care who gave it to them. For a moment, she felt lost. She didn't know what to do, what to say. She wasn't a queen anymore. She wasn't even sure who she was. But as the women looked at her, hope flickering in their eyes, something inside her shifted. Perhaps this was her new purpose, to help them, to rebuild what she had destroyed. It wasn't about ruling an empire anymore. It was about helping people survive. "All right," she said, her voice steady despite the uncertainty inside her. "I'll help you." She looked around at the group, seeing the fear and desperation in their eyes. "We will survive this together. I don't know how, but we'll find a way." She didn't know what that meant yet, but she knew one thing for certain. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. It would be filled with struggle, sacrifice, and uncertainty. But it was a road worth traveling. The queen who had once ruled an empire was gone. In her place stood a woman who would fight for the future of those who had nothing left. As Seraphia left the shelter, a sense of resolve began to build within her. She had lost everything, but that didn't mean she was powerless. She still had the strength to fight for someone. She could still make a difference, even if it was small. The days ahead would be hard, but she would face them head-on. She wouldn't be a queen anymore, but she would still be a leader, captain. Nathaniel Drake had shown her a different path, a path that didn't rely on power or war. It was a path of survival, of compassion, and of rebuilding. And maybe, just maybe, it was the path that would lead her to redemption. The sun was setting as she walked through the ruined streets, but for the first time since the destruction, there was a glimmer of hope in her heart. She wasn't alone. Asterisk. The days that followed Seraphia's decision to help the survivors were not easy. Each day was a new challenge, a new struggle for survival. The once proud queen now worked alongside the people she had once ruled, no longer giving commands from a throne, but working with her hands to rebuild what had been destroyed. The survivors, many of whom had lost family members, homes and hope, began to trust her. Slowly, Seraphia found herself not as a queen, but as a leader who had nothing to offer but her own determination and the will to protect those who remained. It wasn't glamorous and it wasn't easy, but it was something. For the first time in a long while, she felt useful. She spent hours each day gathering what little resources were left in the ruins, helping the survivors fortify their shelters, and ensuring the sick and wounded were cared for. She worked tirelessly, side by side with those she had once seen as mere subjects. No longer did she sit on a throne, ordering her army to battle for her cause. Now she was fighting for their survival, fighting for their future. It was a humbling experience. The survivors were grateful, but there was still a deep sense of fear and uncertainty in the air. They had seen their homes destroyed, their families torn apart, and they had witnessed the downfall of the empire that had once been their protector. How could they trust in the future when everything they knew had been reduced to rubble? It was a question Seraphia could not answer, but she didn't give up. She couldn't. One afternoon, as Seraphia stood by the makeshift walls of their shelter, a familiar face appeared in the distance. It was Captain Nathaniel Drake. He had returned, but this time he wasn't alone. A small group of soldiers followed him, their expressions grim and focused. Seraphia tensed, instinctively reaching for the weapon at her side. Had he come to finish what he had started? To wipe out the last of her people? But then she saw his eyes. They were different, less cold, less calculating. Nathaniel walked towards her, his movements deliberate. As he reached her, he nodded respectfully, a rare gesture of acknowledgement. "I've brought supplies," he sighed, his voice steady. "Food, medicine, and weapons. We're here to help." He paused for a moment, looking around at the survivors. "We've been monitoring the situation. Your people, they need more than just survival. They need hope. I've come to offer that hope." Seraphia's heart raced, confusion swirling in her mind. What was he playing at? Why was he here, offering help when he had been the one to destroy everything? Was this part of some larger plan? She had no answers, but she couldn't deny the sincerity in his voice. He wasn't here to conquer. He wasn't here to finish what he had started. He was here to help them rebuild. For a moment, they stood in silence. Seraphia's thoughts were clouded by doubt. Could she trust him? Could she trust anyone after what had happened to her empire? She looked at the faces of the survivors, at the children who had lost their parents, at the women who had lost their homes, and something inside her shifted. Maybe this was the chance they needed. Maybe it was time to rebuild, not as an empire, but as a community. A new beginning for those who had lost everything. "Thank you," she said quietly, her voice raw with emotion. "We'll accept the supplies. But we need more than just food and medicine. We need to rebuild our trust. We need to rebuild our lives." She paused, meeting Nathaniel's eyes. "Can you help with that?" Nathaniel studied her for a long moment, as if weighing her words carefully. Then he nodded. I can help you rebuild, Seraphia, but it won't be easy. It won't be quick. You'll have to earn the trust of those you lead, and you'll have to find your own way to heal. But I'll be here. We'll be here. He gestured to the soldiers behind him, who began unloading the supplies. It's not just about survival anymore. It's about rebuilding something better, something stronger. Seraphia felt a mix of emotions as she stood there, looking at the man who had destroyed her kingdom, yet now offered her a chance at something more. It wasn't the future she had imagined, but it was a future nonetheless. It wasn't easy and it wasn't certain, but it was hers to shape. With Nathaniel's help, with the help of the survivors, she would rebuild. Not as a queen, but as a leader who would fight for the future, for the people who had lost everything. As the day turned to night, the survivors gathered around the new shelter, a fire burning brightly in the center. It wasn't much, but it was theirs. And for the first time in a long while, Seraphia felt something she hadn't felt in years. Hope. It was fragile, fleeting, but it was there. It was a new beginning, and that was enough. For now, the road ahead would be long and difficult. There would be setbacks, failures, and moments of despair. But Seraphia had learned something over the past few weeks. The world didn't need an empire. It needed people who were willing to stand together, to rebuild, and to fight for a future worth living. She had lost her throne, her crown, and her empire, but in its place, she had found something far more valuable, a chance to make a difference. And she would take it. For the first time in a long while, Seraphia felt ready to face whatever came next. Asterisk. The days turned into weeks, and the survivors began to adapt to their new reality. Seraphia had given up the title of queen long ago, but she had embraced something far more important. She had become a leader. The people who had once seen her as a ruler now saw her as someone who fought beside them, someone who bled with them, and someone who had lost just as much. There was a unity among them, a bond that had never existed before. They were not bound by empire or royalty. They were bound by survival and a shared desire for a better future. Seraphia spent her days working alongside the survivors, helping them rebuild their homes, fortifying their shelters, and making sure that everyone had food and water. It wasn't easy, but it was necessary. She no longer commanded armies or ruled over vast territories. She simply served the people, just as they served each other. The work was hard, but it was honest. It was the kind of work that made her feel alive again. The kind of work that reminded her of what it meant to be human. Nathaniel Drake had kept his word. He and his soldiers returned regularly, bringing more supplies, offering more assistance, and helping to train the survivors. His presence had become a constant reminder that there were still those in the galaxy who believed in something other than conquest and destruction. He had shown Seraphia that not all humans were like the ones who had come to her empire with fire and death. Some of them, like Nathaniel, had come to help, to rebuild what had been broken. One morning, as Seraphia and Nathaniel worked together to organize a group of survivors to clear away debris, Nathaniel approached her with a new plan. He had spent the past few days scouting the surrounding areas and had come up with a strategy to help the survivors reach a safer location. It wasn't an easy task, but it was the next step in rebuilding their lives. Seraphia listened intently. As he laid out his plan, "We can't stay here forever," Nathaniel said, his tone serious. "This place is too exposed. We need to find somewhere safer, somewhere we can start fresh. We've got the supplies, we've got the manpower, but we need to move soon before more hostile forces arrive. It's not just your people at risk anymore. It's everyone." He paused for a moment, watching her carefully. "I know this isn't easy. I know it's hard to leave behind what's left of your home, but it's the best chance we've got." Seraphia nodded slowly, feeling the weight of his words. She had known for some time that staying in the ruins of her empire was no longer an option. They had already lost so much. But moving forward meant leaving behind the memories, the history, and the legacy of what she had once ruled. It was a sacrifice, and it was one she had never imagined making. "You're right," she said finally, her voice steady despite the doubt that lingered inside her. "We can't stay here. We need to move. But it's not just about finding a new place. We need to rebuild our lives, our dignity. We need to show the people that there's something worth fighting for. That we didn't give up, that we're still alive, and that we still matter." Nathaniel's eyes softened as he looked at her. "That's what I'm hoping for," he said quietly. "We'll help you. We'll help everyone." He glanced over at the survivors who were busy working together to clear the rubble and gather supplies. "You've already started rebuilding. This next step is just another chapter, and I'll be here to help you write it." Seraphia felt a warmth in her chest, a small spark of hope. It wasn't much, but it was something. She had spent so much time mourning the loss of her empire, but now, as she looked around at the people who had come together to survive, she realized something important. Her empire had never been about the land or the power. It had always been about the people. And now in their shared struggle, she saw the potential for something even greater than what she had lost. The survivors gathered their belongings and prepared to leave the ruins behind. It wasn't easy, and there were many who feared the unknown, but there was no turning back. The time had come to move forward, to seek a better future. As they walked away from the wreckage, Seraphia led the way, not as a queen, but as a leader, someone who had learned that true strength didn't come from power or conquest. It came from the willingness to rebuild, to stand up after every fall, and to fight for what was right. Nathaniel walked beside her, his presence a constant reminder that they were not alone in this journey. The road ahead was uncertain, but it was theirs to travel. Together, they would face whatever came next. They would face it with hope, with determination, and with the understanding that the future was not something given to them, it was something they had to create. As the survivors moved on, Seraphia looked ahead, her heart filled with a quiet resolve. The destruction of her empire had been painful, but it had also opened her eyes to something far more important. The world didn't need a queen, it needed a community. It needed people who cared for each other, who would fight for each other, and who would rebuild together, and together they would survive. Asterisk. The journey was long, and the road ahead was filled with obstacles. Each step they took brought them farther away from the ruins of Seraphia's fallen empire, but it also brought them closer to something they could build together. The survivors had grown stronger, not just in body but in spirit. They had learned to trust each other, to lean on one another when the road seemed impossible. Seraphia had taken on the role of leader with a determination that surprised even her. She no longer felt the need to be a queen, to rule from a throne. Instead, she was among the people, working side by side with them, listening to their stories, and sharing in their struggles. It was a life she had never imagined, but it was one she had come to embrace. For the first time in a long while, she felt like she belonged. Nathaniel had been true to his word. His soldiers had helped them every step of the way, providing support, supplies, and guidance. They had trained the survivors, showing them how to defend themselves, how to find food and water, and how to rebuild what had been lost. He had become a part of their community, not as a conqueror, but as a protector. His presence was a reminder that even in the darkest times, there were those who cared enough to fight for others. One afternoon, as they crossed a wide, barren field, Seraphia noticed a group of travelers in the distance. They were walking slowly, their heads down, weighed down by exhaustion. As they approached, Seraphia stepped forward, her hand raised in a gesture of peace. The travelers stopped, eyeing her warily. "Are you lost?" Seraphia asked, her voice calm and welcoming. The leader of the travelers, a woman with dark hair and tired eyes shook her head. "No," she replied quietly. "We're just looking for a safe place. A place to start over. We've been on the road for weeks and we've lost so much. We're just trying to survive." Seraphia's heart went out to the woman. She understood the pain in her voice, the desperation that came with the loss of everything. It was the same desperation she had felt not so long ago. She looked back at the group of survivors who were following her, then turned back to the woman. "We've made it this far," Seraphia said, her voice steady. "You're welcome to join us. There's a place where we're rebuilding. It's not much, but it's something. It's a chance for all of us to start over." The woman's eyes filled with hope, and for the first time in weeks, Seraphia saw the light of possibility in someone else's eyes. They weren't alone anymore. There was a chance to create something new, something better. They weren't just surviving, they were building a future. As the new travelers joined their group, the survivors welcomed them with open arms. They shared their food, their supplies, and their knowledge. The community was growing stronger, and Seraphia began to see the spark of hope that had been missing for so long. She no longer saw just a group of broken people, scattered and lost. She saw a family, a team, and a future. The journey continued, and the obstacles they faced only strengthened their resolve. They encountered more challenges, harsh weather, dangerous animals, and the occasional group of hostile survivors who didn't want to share what little they had left. But they overcame each challenge, one step at a time, always with the understanding that they were in this together. Seraphia had changed in ways she hadn't expected. She had learned that leadership wasn't about commanding from a position of power. It was about working with others, sharing in their struggles, and showing them that there was a way forward. She had learned to listen, to lead with empathy, and to never give up, no matter how impossible the situation seemed. Nathaniel had also changed. The man who had once been a soldier, trained to destroy and conquer, had found a new purpose in helping others. He had seen the devastation that war caused, and now he was working toward peace, toward something lasting. His soldiers had become part of the community, not just protectors but also builders, teachers, and friends. They had found a new home, not in the battlefield, but in the hearts of the people they had saved. As they traveled, Seraphia couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. She had lost everything, her throne, her empire, her people, but in its place, she had found something more meaningful. She had found a community, a family, and a future that was hers to shape. It was a future that was no longer defined by power or conquest, but by love, loyalty, and the desire to rebuild what had been broken. One evening, as the sun set behind them, casting a warm golden light across the land, Seraphia stood at the edge of the group, looking out at the horizon. Nathaniel joined her, standing silently by her side. "We've come a long way," he said quietly, his voice filled with a quiet pride. Seraphia nodded, her eyes fixed on the path ahead. "We've still got a long way to go," she replied, her voice steady. "But we'll get there, together." As the stars began to twinkle in the sky above them, Seraphia felt something she hadn't felt in a long time, a sense of peace. The road ahead was uncertain, but it was theirs to walk. And for the first time in a long while, she felt ready to face whatever came next. Together, they would survive. Together, they would rebuild. As the days passed, the survivors grew stronger. What had started as a small group of frightened people, lost in the wake of destruction, had now become a thriving community. They had built homes from the remnants of the old world and had learned to grow their own food. With each passing day, they learned more about survival, more about each other, and more about what it meant to rebuild from nothing. Seraphia had become more than just a leader, she had become a symbol of hope. The people looked to her, not for commands but for guidance. They trusted her, not because she was a queen, but because she had stood beside them, fought with them, and shared in their struggle. She had no crown, no empire, but she had their respect. And that was worth more than any title. Nathaniel had become a part of their world as well. No longer just a soldier, he had found peace in the simplicity of rebuilding. He worked with the survivors, training them in self-defense, helping them hunt and gather food, and offering whatever knowledge he could to aid in their survival. It was a new life for him, and though it was different from the world he had known, he had never felt more fulfilled. The journey that had begun in destruction had now turned into something far greater. It wasn't just about surviving anymore, it was about thriving. And for the first time in years, Seraphia allowed herself to believe that the future might just be something worth fighting for. One morning, as Seraphia stood in the center of their community, she looked out at the group working together to build a new shelter. It was a sight that would have seemed impossible not long ago. People who had once been enemies, who had once fought for survival, were now working side by side, building a future together. They were no longer just survivors. They were pioneers of something new. She felt a sense of pride, but also something deeper. It wasn't just the community she was proud of, it was the people. They had found their strength in each other. They had found hope in a world that had offered them none. And she had helped lead them to this point. It was the first time in years that Seraphia felt truly alive. She wasn't a queen, but she was a leader, and that was enough. Nathaniel came up beside her, his footsteps silent on the dirt path. "You've done well," he said, his voice quiet but sincere. "This is more than I ever expected. You've given these people something they didn't have before, hope." Seraphia turned to look at him, her eyes meeting his. "We've all done it," she replied. "I couldn't have done this alone. We've all worked together to get here. I'm not the one who's built this community. It's all of us, side by side." Nathaniel nodded, his gaze turning toward the group working in the distance. "I know," he said. "But you've been the one to bring them together. You've been the one to show them that there's more to life than just survival." Seraphia smiled softly, her heart swelling with a quiet pride. "I've learned a lot," she said. "I've learned that it's not about ruling. It's about serving. It's about helping others. And it's about finding a way forward, even when it feels like there's nothing left." Nathaniel didn't say anything for a moment, but then he placed a hand on her shoulder. "You've given them something more than survival. You've given them a future." For the first time in a long time, Seraphia felt a deep sense of peace. She had given up everything she had once known. She had lost her empire, her crown, and her title. But in return, she had gained something far more valuable: a community, a family, a future worth fighting for. She had learned that true leadership was not about power or control. It was about lifting others up, about helping them find their strength, and about showing them that there was always a way forward. Even in the darkest of times, as the sun began to set behind the shelter, casting a warm golden light over the community, Seraphia looked around at the faces of the people she had come to care for. They were no longer just survivors. They were a family, and they were stronger because they had built something together. "We've come a long way," she said quietly to Nathaniel, her voice filled with gratitude. "And there's still so much to do." Nathaniel smiled, his eyes reflecting the same quiet pride that she felt. "We'll get there, together." Seraphia nodded, her heart swelling with hope. The road ahead was still uncertain, but it no longer felt impossible. She had faced the worst of what the galaxy could throw at her, and she had come through stronger. She had faced the loss of everything she had ever known, and now she had something far more important, something no one could take away: the strength of the people around her. As the stars began to fill the night sky, Seraphia stood tall, her heart full of hope. They had survived the darkness, and now they would face the future together. They would rebuild, the final stretch of their journey had come. The community Seraphia had helped rebuild, the people she had fought for, were now stronger than ever. They had survived the worst of times, and now they were ready to move forward, to start a new chapter in their lives. The ruins of her empire were far behind them, but they still felt its weight in their hearts. It was a reminder of what they had lost, but also of what they had gained. Seraphia stood at the edge of their new settlement, looking out at the people she had come to call family. The shelter they had built together was small, but it was safe. They had food, water, and the means to protect themselves. They had a future, and that was more than they could have ever hoped for when they first fled the ruins of the old world. The survivors had all found their place in the new community. Some worked the land, planting crops and harvesting food. Others took up trades, making tools and repairing the structures they had built. Nathaniel had continued to help with their defense, teaching them how to fight, how to protect themselves from whatever threats might come. But the most important thing they had was each other. They had become a family, and that was what made them strong. Seraphia had given up her crown, her title, her throne. But in return, she had found something far more valuable: a purpose. She had become a leader, not because of her power or her position, but because she had the strength to stand by her people and help them through their darkest hours. She had earned their trust, and that was worth more than any empire. As she walked through the settlement, she saw the faces of those who had once been broken, once lost. Now they were filled with determination, with hope. They were working together, building something new, something better. And it wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about thriving, about creating a life that they could be proud of. They were no longer just survivors. They were builders, creators, and dreamers. Nathaniel approached her as she stood by the small community center they had built. He had been there from the beginning, helping them through every step of the journey. She looked at him, her heart swelling with gratitude. He had been her ally, her companion, and her friend. Without him, they might not have made it this far. "We've done it," he said quietly, his eyes scanning the settlement. "I didn't think it was possible at first, but we've built something real here. We've given these people a chance to live again." Seraphia nodded, her heart full. "We've all done it," she said. "But it wasn't just about rebuilding this place. It's about rebuilding ourselves too. It's about finding hope again, even when everything seemed lost." Nathaniel smiled, his eyes softening. "You've given them that hope, Seraphia. You've shown them that even after everything we've been through, there's still a reason to keep fighting." Seraphia didn't respond right away. She simply stood there, looking out at the community that had risen from the ashes. The road ahead wasn't without its challenges, but it was theirs to walk. They had faced the worst of times, and they had come through stronger. They had found each other in the darkness, and together, they had built something that could last. The sun was beginning to set, casting a golden light over the settlement. Seraphia felt a quiet sense of peace settle over her. This wasn't the future she had once imagined, but it was a future nonetheless. It wasn't about power or conquest. It was about love, loyalty, and the strength to keep moving forward, no matter what. "Do you ever think about the past?" Nathaniel asked softly. "About what we lost?" Seraphia turned to him, her eyes filled with understanding. "I think about it every day," she said. "But I've learned that we can't live in the past. We can't go back to what we had. All we have is now, and the future we build together." Nathaniel nodded, his expression thoughtful. "You've taught me that," he said. "It's not about what we've lost. It's about what we've gained, and what we can still give." Seraphia smiled, her heart swelling with pride. "And we've gained a family," she said softly. "That's more than enough." As the last rays of sunlight faded behind the horizon, Seraphia stood beside Nathaniel, looking out at the future they would build. It wasn't easy, it wasn't perfect, but it was real. They had survived and they had rebuilt. And together, They would face whatever came next with hope in their hearts and a future worth fighting for. They had risen from the ruins. Together, they would thrive.